Good morning and welcome to Sunrise Daily. I'm Ayo Makinde.
Well, it's 7 a.m. on the DOT right here in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos. You're welcome to the program. I'm Kayode Okikyolu.
Since you haven't really forgotten your radio skills, you know what I'm saying?
You can never take it out. Really.
Oh, yeah, clearly.
And it's part of it,
I know that.
Audio, visual. And, we always
You
talk
just
about...
have to find a way around it. It's okay.
And we always talk about the airwaves, right?
Yes, airwaves.
But it's not only information or,
that flies, right?
broadcast that goes through the airwaves. Aeroplanes have to go through airwaves as well, or the air. Let me be particular about that. The air, all right, the air travel. And that's what we're focusing on today, because clearly during times like this, holidays and festivities, people have to rely on air travel just to, travel between one place and the other, perhaps go meet with family, go rest, depending on what works for you. But air travel plays a huge role in all of that conversation. And this is a sector really that has been under a lot of pressure, intense pressure, talking about COVID-19, then the rise in aviation fuel and a lot of other issues, not to forget Forex as well, especially in Nigeria. Those are the major issues that the sector had to or is still grappling with. But yes, we understand that the operators have a lot to grapple with, clearly. But then there's this contract between the operators and the customers, those who have to travel, the travelers. And I think even pre-COVID, we've had this recurring challenge of either flight cancellation or flight delays without prior notice. Mainly, a lot of them you have that challenge without prior notice. There's also now the high cost of tickets. And the return ticket you could actually purchase at that time for what, depending on where you're going, what, maybe 50,000, 60,000. You'd realize that same amount is not even enough for a one-way ticket these days. And I know we've tried to tinker around how to find a solution to this challenge, because don't forget, the aviation sector plays a huge role in the business environment. Okay, a lot of business deals are facilitated by the aviation sector, so you have to do a meeting now somewhere, you have to do an inspection, you need to fly fast, and if you have to go via the roads, our rail is not all around, doesn't connect everywhere yet. So most options you have, if you want to get there fast enough, is the aviation sector. So it plays a major role in ensuring that business moves smoothly. In fact, ease of business can also be tied back to the aviation sector. So it's a very, very important sector. So if we don't get it right, there'll be a major challenge. And, hearing some of the passengers complain, especially during this, Eid season, just reminded me of that meeting between the FCCPC, of course, the operators, and the House of Reps. It was a committee hearing. And I saw at that meeting that, the FCCPC, that's the Consumer Protection Council, was sort of being hounded by I think it was a deputy speaker of the House at that time saying, it's a business. You don't expect these people to reduce price and all of that because they're running a business. In fact, the question was put to him that if it was your business, would you run it that way? And, it just hit me this morning that even the person meant to protect the consumers is sort of being, do I say hounded now? So how much of protection can he do?
He himself needs protection.
He needs protection, right.
I think, you've spoken quite eloquently and succinctly about the importance of the aviation sector. Today is the first work day for many people in the course of this week. From the beginning of this week, it's the first time some people are going to work. And guess what? There are a good number of people who may have traveled on Thursday or Friday of last week to various parts of the country via the air. And just before the holiday, it was in the news that airfares had increased significantly. Airfares, regular routes, Lagos, Abuja, Lagos, Port Harcourt, Lagos, EU, among others, they were set to be relatively stable at that figure you mentioned the other time, 50,000 naira. And that's just for one way, of course. The issues aren't just going to go away. Yes, we recognize it's a business, but it's not the only sector that is having issues. The power sector is also having issues. The telcos, the telecom sector is also having serious issues. The banking sector, I think as far back as 10, 15 years ago, I read a report that says that the banking sector have to fuel generators and all to power the ATMs all across the nation to the tune of, is it 10 billion naira? As far back as some 10 15 years ago now.
Thank God they discovered solar.
Okay, so I mean, you can just imagine that, and that's for banks. How about no, for alternative power, not necessarily for alternative power. Could be UPS, could be inverter, could be whatever it is. Now we can't say the same for the telcos. Telcos can't use that kind of power system. It's not sustainable for them. It's not durable enough. So they have to power generators literally all across the nation. How about vandalism? How about so many other things that go into it? So we recognize that the aviation sector is hard hit. They had to go under during COVID-19. So for like a year or so, a good number of airlines were not working. And there's been a lot of calls for some kind of subvention. What's the word that's usually used? Well, some kind of support for the aviation sector and all of that, for the private operators of the aviation sector. All of that is noted. But at the end of the day, it's all about the people. So if the people cannot afford the fares, what happens to the business? I remember, I recall seeing some, social media videos of people who are in an airplane, and they're saying, in this like maybe 30-seater or 50-seater, Airbus, I'm the only one, and they're showing a video of himself or herself being just the only one, or maybe just one or two people in the whole,
on the flight
aircraft, and the aircraft has to fly. So if it's too high, many people are not going to do it. So it's a catch-22. It's a very delicate balance for the people who are operating it. So the responsibility of the FCCPC is there. The responsibility, thankfully, of the intervention of the House of Representatives is also there. But don't also forget that we have something that is called a Bill of Rights. How effective is that in the scheme of things for the people who are involved in all of these conversations with people? So people are complaining. Government has a job to do. FCCPC has to do its job. Who is protecting who? Okay. It's a whole mix altogether. But at the end of the day, we all have our responsibilities. We all have our roles to play to make sure things go the way they ought to go.
Yes, and I do hope that we find a resolution to this, because, as you said, it's not just the aviation sector that is going through these challenges, and it plays a vital role in ensuring that, business happens. So I really hope that we've not forgotten, because it was a big deal at some point. The air, they wanted to shut down. They were saying they were not safe in the air. So I hope we've not forgotten about this just yet. So something to chew on this morning. But another thing is the front pages. So let's get down to it. The front pages of the dailies in a moment.
Let's begin with the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. It's around something we had a conversation over yesterday, and it's not just going away yet. World Press Freedom Day. Nigerian journalists decry worsening conditions. That's what you have on the front page. Stories on page 5. 71 pressmen killed, 293 incarcerated in 1 year worldwide. Practitioners under surveillance in Nigeria, says IPI. Stick to ethics, governors tell media. It's surprising. I saw a report by the IPC detailing a good number of people in Nigeria within the past 2 years that have had quite some hounding in our profession. It's something that gives concern.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, well, that's the lead of the paper. That picture is of the Durbar Festival at the Emir of Kano's Palace yesterday. And right under that one, will never allow terrorists to have their way, scribed to the Sultan. Find the story of that one on page 4. And we talked about aviation right under the nameplate. 7 years after, FG yet to implement aviation development roadmap. It's part of the mix, right? Story is on page 21. And that countdown of the Daily Trust, let's not forget, Bethel Baptist High School, Kujama. Boys, the students are still in captivity 304 days after. That's the Daily Trust newspaper today.
We'll take a look at the Nigerian Tribune. Yes, that's what we have next on the lineup of things to chew on. It's a breakfast show, right? So we have the breakfast in abundance. It's the Nigerian Tribune with this one. Plot to jettison zoning. Akeredolu, Ndume, Kokori, Bamidele, others won APC. This is certainly not the time for equivocation, Akeredolu. If APC fields northern candidate, that will be tantamount to third term, Ndume. It will be suicidal if it goes to the north again, Kokori. So page 2, clearly this conversation around zoning is not going away anytime soon. So there you have it. Wow, that picture on the front page shows the governor of Borno State receiving the UN Secretary General in Maiduguri during his first official visit to Nigeria. So quite an interesting one there, especially because he's trying to shed the light on victims of terrorism and what can be done to end it altogether. I know there's been a lot of conversation around what more should be done. So I guess that's also another big one this morning. On top of the nameplate, you see Fayemi Akpabio join presidential race declared today. And right next to that, you see Olaopo Hashim declares presidential ambition, says new, better Nigeria possible. If you're still trying to keep count on how many people have declared to run, well, good luck, really. Even for me, I'm almost losing count right now. It's like another day, another declaration. So quite interesting times we're in. A couple of other stories on the front page. Amidst all of this, there's still ASU strike very present with us. Sadly, students protest over prolonged ASU strike. It's on page 16. It looks like all the attention has shifted from the ASU strike. Now it's on politics and trying to get the ticket, or at least declare if you won't get a ticket, but just show up generally. And it's a really sad reality right there.
Well, you already said it. That's what's going to happen to governance when politics kicks in.
I wonder if I don't know. Is this not a big deal? Are we the ones making a big deal out of the fact that ASU has been on strike for close to what? It was on February 14th, close to 3 months now.
We just talked about 304 days of children in captivity.
Sometimes you want to have a sit down and say, okay, you know what are the priorities for you? Maybe we're just the ones making a big deal out of it. Well, so maybe our priorities are not your priorities. So let's know, what are your priorities?
Well, it's only when we have a national ethos, a national vision that we all buy into, that we can say we have a mutual priority. Don't you think so?
Honestly. Well, there's sports on the back page. You see PSG Ayosime as replacement for Mbappe. A report, that's according to a report. If Osimhen was a student in Nigeria, he'd be on strike right now. I wonder what would have happened to his ambition, to play football. But you know what? That's the Nigerian Tribune this morning.
Well, you talked about the APC. Well, here's the PDP. Front page, Daily Independent. PDP governors kick as Atiku plans to retain Peter Obi as running mate. As about the 2023 presidency, find the details on the front page, continues on the inside pages. Right under that picture on the front page, 1.12 trillion naira food import bill. Even that alone is news. Well, guess what it said? What it's about? Stakeholders urge FG to tackle insecurity, low purchasing power. Question you then want to ask is how is government going to tackle low purchasing power?
Well, we have fiscal and monetary policies, right?
Okay.
We have. That's essentially why you have government to, identify the problem first. And again, to be sure that we all have the same priorities, because the problem identified by government might not be the problem the people identify. But yeah, identify the problem. Come up with the right policies. That's the purpose of government, essentially.
I don't know. Anyway, that's what you have on the front page of the Daily Independent newspaper this morning, and a number of others right there on the front page. Right beside that story, No section of Nigeria should have domineering advantage over others. That's ascribed to Senator Bamidele. Of course, that's something you'll also find in the Constitution. Hold public officers accountable if Nigeria must move forward, Amechi tells journalists. So since he's a public officer as well, I guess we can start from him, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Continue with him.
Or continue
generally.
Nance warns politicians to be civil as 2023 poll approaches. Or else, what happens?
That's the National Association of Nigerian Students, right? Nance. How about warn them to get ASU, or at least resolve this ASU FG impasse?
Well, let me hope that warning had gone ahead. That's the Daily Independent today.
Well, next up is a Vanguard newspaper with this APC-PDP presidential slot. I like that. Merges it together, right? Be fair. SID tickets to South, Clark, and Southern governors insist. And a host of riders. Power must shift for equity, justice, fair play. Southern governors. Gowan should have allowed Igbo leave Nigeria. Zoning must hold. Clark. You see, rotational presidency legal, constitutional, Southern senators, and host of other riders. Definitely, this is a priority now for the, politicians now. Page 5 of the paper. Now, the picture on the front page is quite interesting. So you see the president right in the middle is flanked by Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo, who has declared to run for president, right? And then the governor of the central bank, Godwin Emefiele, who people are urging to declare to run for president. So
it reminds me of youths earnestly ask for Abacha.
Wow.
I just suddenly came to mind.
That was a thing.
Yeah, it was a thing.
Wordplay and dish. Okay. There you go. Really?
Well, you didn't know. It was a thing. It was big.
Clearly.
It was big.
Clearly,
I've forgotten the name of the fellow at the forefront of it.
Clearly, some people ignored it, no matter how big it was. But under that picture, you'd even wonder if the picture is recent, but apparently it's during the Salah homage, by the way. But under the picture, you see, keep speaking truth to power, but extend it to terrorists. Buhari tasks Catholic bishops. So that's also another thing you find there. And that's a sad one. Beheading of 2 soldiers. Army vows to unmask and bring perpetrators to book. Very heart-wrenching, that story. Page 6 of the Vanguard newspaper. And by the way, you have something on World Press Freedom Day. Obaseki, Sanwo-Olu, Abiodun, Otom, Eshol journalists of support. Page 8. How many of them are seeking re-election? Let me see. 1. Or election too. Okay. All right. I mean, good support. We welcome that. Page 8. And Mr. and Mrs. of course is there, but just before that, there's sports on the back page, by the way. Liverpool qualify for final again. I hear that's the 10th time. I imagine, and it's a record of sorts because they're essentially in the final of major competition. So they're in the running for a quadruple. You think I'm a Liverpool fan, right? What do you know? Yeah, that's that one. Of course, Arsenal are #1 contenders to sign Osimhen. So we had PSG earlier, now Arsenal. So that's what you find on the sports page. But Mr. and Mrs., a quick one. Anyway, so this is Mrs., or in fact, Mr. in his bathroom robe saying, if I'm not a man, who is a man? Mrs. from somewhere in the house says, a person who is there for his wife. Morning, that's
M.
for M. Afternoon,
A.
And night,
N.
So M, morning, afternoon, night. You get M-A-N, man. And Mr. is pocketing now. Says, that's a jobless man. But Mr. Really, you have to be there for your wife as much as you can.
Yes.
Morning, afternoon, night, even midnight.
Yes.
And early morning.
But being there doesn't mean being physically there.
There you go.
Okay.
That's Vanguard.
There is no misses here to defend themselves. The Leadership newspaper has this one lead story. 30 days to INEC deadline on flag bearers. Southern governors insist on power shift to South. That story is on page 4. Says it's our turn to produce next president. Warns parties to avoid self-inflicted crisis. Don't create tension over zoning. Northern elders reply. CSOs back governors insist on Southern presidents. Fayemi set to declare today. Well, the details of that you will find on page 4 of the paper this morning, along with several other stories that will take your fancy. Above the nameplate, insecurity. Please revive forensic labs criminal database. Some to cheer. Find the details in there. Resignation. Obey Section 84 of Electoral Act. Lawyers tell appointees. Are those lawyers also aware of the judgment of the court?
It's an advice, really.
Okay.
Say, you know what, expect. But hey, I'll just leave it there.
That's the leadership newspaper this morning.
Well, The Guardian has at its big story, intense jostle for market share as telcos delve into retail banking. So this is a very interesting topic, by the way. Very interesting, seeing the way, banks are essential. Or people, businesses generally are finding new ways to operate, just spread their tentacles, essentially to stay alive, because the landscape is changing very fast. So you have to be on top of your game, so you have that relevance. You see, MTN targets Q4 for PSB services, Airtel to announce this month. Banks struggle to retain talent as telcos launch aggressive headhunt. Telco's broadband control raises fear of unfair competition. You see, DMB's source viable fintechs for acquisitions, I told you. I'm serious. This is like one of the most interesting things happening right now. You think it's politics, but hey, there's a lot.
Well, it is corporate politics.
Right?
Sorts. You remember there's one of these big banks that acquired one of these telcos some time ago.
All right.
Yeah. I don't know whether they gave it up eventually to one of the existing. I think that happened.
You think they saw into the future, because you can't really divorce this relationship now. A lot of the things, the USSD, the transfer, you do it on
banks.
Exactly, you do it on your phones, and you have to have that interconnectivity. Yeah. So I'm following this up definitely. Starts on the front page, continues on page 2, and of course that talk about zoning to the south makes its way right there. Peter Obi stresses need to replace sharing with production formula. It's a page 7 read. And you see this one, Why Strike May Persist in Varsities by Sanu and Nat. So lots of people on strike right now, not just ASU, by the way, but let's leave it there for The Guardian.
Nigerian News Direct has this one, Southwest Agenda. Akande Oshoba to meet Tinubu, Osinbajo, other presidential aspirants, as Akeredolu insists power must shift to south. Story is on page 4 of the paper this morning. And a good number of stories you'll find on the front page. My government won't condone acts that can truncate peace, harmony in Ogun, says Abiodun. Stories on page 11. And insecurity linked to Nigeria's failure to invest in human capacity building. That's ascribed to Peter Obi. Find the details of that on page 4 as well. Right above the nameplate, 71% of Nigerian businesses were hit by cyber attacks in 2021. Ooh. Well, that's the Nigerian News Direct this morning, and that about wraps up the papers for today. So many other issues, but we're picking on a few of them right after this break. Stay with us.
The 3rd of May every year is observed as a World Press Freedom Day, as declared by the United Nations General Assembly. The day is observed to raise awareness on the importance of press freedom and to remind government all over the world of their duty to respect and uphold the right to freedom of expression as enshrined under Article 19 of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights and marking the anniversary of the Windham Declaration. The 2022 World Press Freedom Day, with the theme Journalism Under Digital Siege, highlights the multiple ways in which journalism is endangered by surveillance and digitally instigated attacks on journalists and the consequences of all of this on public trust in digital communications. The role of the media is to act as watchdog to protect public interest against malpractice and create public awareness. A former spokesperson of the Senate believes journalists are operating freely in Nigeria.
Ours is to support and create that enabling environment for a vibrant, innovative, and productive media industry.
However, despite the Freedom of Information Act in Nigeria that provides for access to public records and information to the extent consistent with public interest, but till date, it's still a Herculean task to get information from the corridors of power. Journalists' requests are usually turned down and sometimes results to harassment. The Nigeria Guild of Editors in a statement says it's still inalienable right of journalists to disseminate information, and in keeping with such can one say there is independent press in Nigeria. The statement adds that editors in Nigeria remain under threat despite the practice of democracy in the country. The common challenges faced by journalists in Nigeria includes paucity of information, lack of access to verifiable information and data, harassment by security operatives, attacks on media personalities, sometimes leading to death. The head of the European Union delegation to Nigeria and ECOWAS shares his thoughts on press freedom.
Globally, we see more and more attempts to curb the space for free media, also by systematically undermining their credibility, and too many journalists have lost their lives or have put their lives at risk for having exposed inconvenient truth.
The latest UNESCO World Trends report also highlights some challenges being faced by journalists through surveillance and hacking, which are compromising journalism.
Still on press freedom, right? World Press Freedom Day was yesterday, and a good number of things have been said. A whole lot of issues have been raised, but have they been sufficiently raised? And have they been sufficiently addressed? What are the things that the media, the role the media has to play in this nation's, in the building of the nation? How well is the media empowered, even though it has a constitutional responsibility of holding government to account? What's the empowerment and what's the enabling environment to fulfill that constitutional responsibility? Those are some of the issues we'll be taking on with two of our guests this morning, but we'll begin here with Dr. Akin Akinbulu, who is Executive Director, Institute for Media and Society, IMS. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, most certainly, first of all, let me ask you, a host of things have been said about the difficulty of practicing, of media practice in Nigeria today, perhaps made more complex by COVID and a number of other things that's happening. In terms of the environment for practice, what are your thoughts?
Thank you for this question. Environment for practice. I am deeply, deeply worried about legislation. Legislation. Again and again and again, the authorities put in place legislations that are disempowering for the media. And I give you two recent, even ongoing examples. The Electoral Act was passed just recently. You probably know that within that law, a lot of people have celebrated it, the passage and the assent by the president. But do you know that within that law, there's a provision somewhere in a certain section 95 of that law that says that during the electoral process, journalists must give equal coverage, prime time, equal coverage to all the political parties. And when we discussed with our colleagues, they said, how does that happen? And there is a penalty attached to it in that law. Millions to be paid by defaulting media organizations, millions and prison terms to be served by defaulting journalists. Indeed, the law says all the journalists, virtually senior journalists in the media organization that defaults. Isn't that terrible? And we are in an electoral process going towards 2023, really disempowering.
So you think that it will be hard to achieve that clearly for the...
Clearly, for the media, very hard. And when you see the penalties that are attached, you begin to wonder. A second one, that I want to refer to that gives me concern. I'm sure you are aware that sometime last year, midway into 2021, there was a public hearing in the National Assembly, a public hearing on a number of bills, including a bill on amendment of the National Broadcasting Commission Act, which generated a lot of controversy. One issue there that people still haven't given attention to is that that bill has a provision on resource generation for the media, which disempowers most of the media organizations in this country. You know what that provision says? It makes a provision for what is called the digital access fee. That is under digital broadcasting. That would be a major source of revenue for the broadcasting industry. Every citizen will be expected to pay if you have to access broadcasting content in this country. And that bill says that the proceeds from all of that will be shared by just 4 entities. Who are these 4 entities? The signal distributors, 40%. The regulatory body, 40%. Then the national broadcasting media houses, that's TA and FRCN, 10%. All the private broadcasting organizations, 0. All the state government-owned broadcasting organizations, 0. All the others, 0. And that's going to be a major source of revenue. Meaning that major players, key players have been shut out at a time when the operating environment, business environment is so inclement, and the media requires a lot of resources to be able to stay afloat.
Just a quick one, Kyle. Isn't it also, maybe I should put it this way, has there been any role by any media organization or media practitioner to challenge any of these 2? Because I know that there will be more. It's just 2 that you've cited now. Have they been challenged in any way?
Well, as I said, the last one that I talked about, that's the one in the bill. The first forum, the forum for challenge is the public hearing. And I think the House of Representatives did the right thing by organizing a public hearing to get input from the public, from stakeholders into that bill. And stakeholders, in all fairness, made inputs into that, made recommendations. I remember that I was also there, and we made recommendations on what should happen. So that, for example, we said, well, this issue of sharing formula proceeds from this digital access fee should not be a statutory matter at all. Don't bring it to legislation to start with. And then put it, say, under the regulator. Let the regulator, that's the National Broadcasting Commission, superintend the sharing of this, working with stakeholders. And then the expectation will be that all the stakeholders will have fair share from this resource that's coming, this huge resource that's coming into the broadcasting industry. So I remember, that many stakeholder groups were there to make. And then we're expecting that this process will be taken to conclusion. The National Assembly hasn't said it will take those recommendations, but you never can tell. So I expect that stakeholders will continue to engage to ensure that the needful is done. That is by making appropriate provisions in the law, by taking stakeholders' recommendations.
And just a moment. I'd like to read that section which you talked about in Electoral Act, the section 95. So our viewers are also enlightened on what it says. And sub 2 says, or let me start from 3, because it gives some sort of preamble. So it says, that's 95.3 says, media time shall be allocated equally among the political parties or candidates at similar hours of the day. Then 4 says, at any public electronic media, equal airtime shall be allotted to all political parties or candidates during prime times at similar hours each day, subject to the payment of appropriate fees. So don't you think that's perhaps a fair provision then to add, subject to the provision of appropriate fees? So it's not just an all-comers affair. Let's be honest, if we have how many political parties, dozens of them, there's no way you can accommodate all the parties and even all the candidates. So don't you think putting the provision of subject to the payment of fees makes it fair enough?
Okay, first I want you to read that to the point of the penalties that are stipulated. But before you do, let me also say to you that that's another problem, with that piece of legislation. As we know, in this part of the world, within our broadcasting culture, within Nigeria, it is not all electoral content or election time content in the media that is paid for. That's one of the problems with that. As you know, during the electoral process, there's a lot of public service content and the media. So it's unfair to say in every situation, money should be paid. There should also be provision in that law making a case, or there should be a provision saying, well, in cases, if it's in cases.
Well, let's just.
You do here, don't you? There is an electoral process. Yes.
I do understand what you're saying.
So it's not in all cases, that they even pay. There are situations where the content is public service, they don't pay.
Oh, certainly.
A lot of it. So,
well, for those who want to pay, they have to pay appropriate fees according to the law. Well, we're not alone on this conversation, Dr. Akimbulu. Markwe also has someone else in Abuja. Good morning, Markwe.
Good morning, gentlemen. What a day it is here in the Federal Capital Territory. It is raining, or it has been raining cats and dogs. Visibility was very poor this morning, and well, pardon the fact that I'm just joining the program. We have with us this morning Ejiro Omukoro, who is a broadcast journalist and policy advocate. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
I was unsure. I think I did say that, whether to greet you Happy Press Freedom Day. And I think I had that same dilemma last night when my colleague was talking about this particular story I was about to hand over to me. I didn't know whether to greet. There's supposed to be a day that journalists celebrate, so to speak. But then there are questions as to whether there is anything to celebrate, because this day is also supposed to, well, that was yesterday, it was also supposed to highlight the challenges that journalists face. From where you stand, do you see us haven't made improvements in this line in terms of journalism as a whole, as a profession, especially here in Nigeria?
There's still a lot of room for improvement. There's still a lot of room for synergy, a lot of room for understanding each other's role and respecting the roles as enshrined by the Nigerian Constitution. I mean, a situation where you have the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary not respecting the role we play as watchdog and as the fourth estate, enshrined by the Constitution, leaves you mind-boggled most of the time. You see a situation between the interagencies, for example. They feel it's a beef between the journalists and the other agencies. Good enough, I think if we were going to talk about accomplishment, having the FOI bill into an act is good, but it's not enough if it's not implemented, if it's not enforced, and if it does not do public good for the Nigerian public. So if we look at the fact that we had journalists being arrested, I mean, when you categorize us as Nigeria in the space of press freedom relative to the world standardization, we're really far below. I mean, for us to be named as one of the country in Africa, particularly as the #1 place where journalists aren't safe by that index, I don't think that's good enough for us. So there's a lot of room, really, to talk about press freedom that it should be in Nigeria, that we're not there yet for it.
It is, you know, quite mind-boggling, because when you think of when I was still quite a child in the days of the military. I think by 1999, when they handed over, I was just about to enter university. But the early days of my childhood, I remember reading the dailies or reading Tell magazine, and you used to hear a lot of stories of, you know, journalists printing from underground or writing from underground, and I had very vivid imaginations about them really being under the ground, you know, and writing. But one will say that we've since moved a great deal from that past. However, there are questions as to how free the press continues to be, even in a democracy. Yesterday, we're listening to Mr. Larry Arogundade of the ICRC or so, and then he was talking about how in some states it is very difficult for journalists to be able to write freely. It would seem that it's now selective, the areas where the press can actually claim some freedom, perhaps in Abuja here, in the Federal Capital Territory, or maybe in Lagos, and we sometimes think that maybe that covers for the rest of the country. Have we really been able to take into cognizance the dangers faced by journalists who are in other states of the country trying to do what they need to do?
What you just described is a case of weaponization of the brown envelope. I'll break it down. A situation where journalists are not properly paid. A circumstance where you enable an environment that pits the journalists at the mercy of government. An environment that promotes a situation where workers in state-owned media houses feel that they are hamstrung, right? They live in a straitjacket, as it were, and they can't speak truth to power. When you put all of these elements together, that is what enables an environment like that. And there's been a lot of instances where there have been compromises. You see weaponization of the brown envelope on one side, which means journalists fighting journalists. Where you see state fighting journalists. Where you see there's a disrespect for the FOI Act, the Freedom of Information Act, where you go to ministries and say, look, we need this data. You see all of that playing out. And then you see internal rancor to some extent, even among the different multi-layered media organizations we have in terms of agencies or as regulators and all of that played together. Now, when you see a situation, you have a regulatory agency not understanding that its role is for the public masses. Instead, it's for government's interests. We've got a problem. Because there's a difference between government interest and national interest. We've seen situations where it's presented to us that, oh no, it's about national interest. No, it's a government interest. And government interests are always driven by party interest. And party pressure, legal pressure, all of those kinds of pressure are the things that journalists faced. Where you have internal policies within media organizations too that are not enabling media journalists to have the mouth right? And the power to speak truth to power. That's another problem. Where you even have a situation where owners of media organization can oppress their workers. You've got a problem. So you see the owner's interest is on the one hand, you see the government interest playing out. All of these many interests, they are all confusing, even for the journalist. But at the same time, the big issue here is the fact that if we don't have more professionals in the media industry who own more media organizations, right, and who understand and value the job as a fourth estate, we're going to continue where we are, and we hope we don't go back to where you described earlier, Mark. Because if we should go back there, we're going to be in trouble, but we cannot afford that.
Some people will claim that, you know, those were, I don't know, maybe it was because of the era, that those were the golden days of journalism.
In terms of its excitement, right?
Maybe it was the excitement, but in terms of how journalists were willing to lay their lives for their country.
Oh, yes.
And were willing to pay the supreme sacrifice regardless, and that the job still went on. I don't know if you agree with that. Or maybe we're just, are we romanticizing it because we were not there? I don't know. I mean, when I mean we're not there, we were not with them at that time.
But I think they did a good job back then.
Yes.
And they were really living up to the responsibility as a fourth estate.
Yeah.
We need that kind of vibrancy. Yeah. We need that kind of commitment to journalism. That's why I said, when journalists don't understand that the brown envelope has become weaponized against them, they're going to continue to be tools. We need to be aware of even our own responsibility, whether directly, indirectly, consciously, unconsciously. Are we aware of it or not? How are we also enabling it?
Do you think that democracy also has played a role in terms of, will I say, removing the utopia? Because, you know, then it was seen that there was something to fight for. What the journalist was trying to get rid of was the era of the military dictator, and we looked forward to the installation, or it was saying the emergence of a democracy, and we thought, you know, that was going to be all and end all of our government, of our wars at that time, because almost everything was attributed to the fact that the people were not a part of the government. Now we have a democracy, so to speak, and it was saying that it is not yet delivering on what we thought it was going to deliver. Do you think that has demoralized today's journalist?
I would not say totally. I would say this, that in a way there's been a shift from, go around the street and ask a typical Nigerian, are you willing to die for this country? The mindset to be willing to sacrifice for Nigeria is permissive totally in all our spheres of life as we speak right now. So that if you see it, it's manifesting even in journalism. That is not to say that there are no journalists who are outstanding in speaking truth to power and uncovering so much. I mean, when we talk about the strides of the declaration of the state of emergency in rape case and all of that, it's because journalists have done a good job of that. When we talked about the sex for grade marks that actually became a big deal, journalists have done a lot of that to make that come to bear. So we are also seeing an emergence, whether we like it or not. And I think that even the present system understands that, look, there's a different emergence happening. A young set of vibrant journalists are ready to tackle, are ready to speak truth to power and say things as they are. And I think as media organization, this is the opportunity for us to ride on that conversation and give that leverage. But we also need to protect our journalists. We need welfare packages that will protect them. We need good pay. We don't want them to be maltreated. We don't want them to be weaponized in many ways that we've seen happen again and again. But we also need journalists to learn to stand up to owners of media organization. We don't stand up enough to them. Some persons feel that's their livelihood, that's where it ends, they cannot fight the system. But you have to understand that for change to happen, you have to somehow hold the system accountable. That includes where you work. So even your terms of contract, all of those kinds of conversation, journalists don't really have that conversation. And I think we need to begin to have that put in place properly. We have so many bodies representative of the media organization. Now, they need to be more cohesive. This independence of I am of print, I am of broadcast, I am of the other online. No. We should work as a collective, because the stronger we are when we speak with one voice, the better we can effect the changes that we seek.
Well, there's so many questions to be asked in terms of what unionism has also done for the sector, whether it has helped better the practice of the profession. There have been many talks around quackery and its emergence, and now there are questions as to whether or not we should introduce professional exams, so to speak, something that qualifies anyone at all who desires to be a journalist, regardless of what he or she studied in school, to be a journalist, so to speak. I do not know if it's something that our guest in Lagos will support. Gentlemen.
Well, he's here. He's heard you. You want to speak to the issue she just raised?
Yeah, issue of capacity building,
or standardization.
Or standardization.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is important, but what I do not want in this is something that will be hijacked by governmental authorities. Capacity building, yes. For standardization, I would want such initiatives, to be industry initiatives.
Well, if it's going to be industry powered or championed by the industry,
yes,
how is it supposed to take on? Because one is wondering, with the level of quackery, the level of unprofessionalism and some of the issues that our Abuja guest has raised, one would wonder if indeed the practitioners of the industry are willing or able to take the lead.
Well, what I think will require more is collaboration, more collaborative work. There is no doubt in my mind that there have been efforts in this direction, efforts on standardization, even within the industry over time. What has not happened, in my opinion, is sufficient collaboration among stakeholders within the industry group saying, this is the way we want to go, and then, speaking with one voice, not just speaking, but also walking the talk.
I'd like us to unpack a lot of the points she made. We probably won't be able to unpack them because there's a lot of them. But, there's this, I don't want to say it looks like we're daggers drawn, the press and the government. And I was reading the statement from the Nigerian Guild of Editors yesterday in commemoration of the day. And part of the statement says, we need to remind government at all levels in Nigeria that a free and independent media that can keep the people informed and hold leaders accountable is essential for a strong and sustainable democracy, including free and fair elections. But you often hear people in government saying, you dispress people. You're trying to look for trouble, or this, you're trying to, just paint us in a bad light. But clearly, a government is there, especially in democracy, to uphold the standards of democracy. The same way the press is there to also uphold the standards of democracy. So why does it seem as though we seem to have the same goal, but it doesn't look like they're on the same page? I don't know if you get that. Is there a fundamental flaw, really, that we're missing?
My challenge with this so-called position of government or government people is that they seem to pretend not to know that the Constitution, for example, especially creates a function for the media. And it's not for a joke. Not many institutions have such functions created for them. Section 22 says the media shall have the power to hold government accountable to the people. So when such an institution has such a mandate, from the Constitution, and such an institution wants to carry out this mandate, but in carrying it out, do we say it collides with the interests of those in government? Because to hold government accountable means you want to look into the activities of government. What are they doing? And that's not what they like. And that is why you find these big problems, attack on the media, on journalists all over the place, state governments all over. And then, they just, a journalist has written something, put something on his neck, terrorism charges.
Dr. Kimbula, I find it amusing sometimes when these issues are raised. The issues Kade has raised, which made you, refer to the Constitution, only brings one thing to my mind. There are pressmen in government. There are always pressmen in government, at least to the best of my knowledge. Every press secretary, information officer, PRO, chief essay, media, whatever it is, they are usually from the press. So isn't it possible or important for them also to see this constitutional responsibility and make known to their principals that, look, this is important?
My reading of the situation is that once in many of our colleagues who change roles, so to speak, move from the media into the side of government as special assistant media, special advisor media, chief press secretary, all those roles. In many situations, they find themselves in a dilemma. Where, yes, I have come from a constituency which has this role, and this is the role that they are playing. But then you find yourself in another constituency where the occupant of that position doesn't see things that way. These people, these press boys, can't just be writing things against us anyhow. They can't just, I mean, they say press boys can't just be writing, and there you are. And then the guy begins to say, Phil, if I continue to tell him the truth, he fires me. The guy probably doesn't want to get fired. So it's a dilemma. You know, I see, this is my reading of the situation, that they find themselves in a very difficult position. And they are unable, yes, you know, to really engage their principles, the new principles on the other side.
I think it points to a point she also made.
Yes.
It's interesting how this conversation is building about the fact that, you know, there's a business angle as well. There's the economical or the economic angle to this. I mean, it's a job, right? It's a job that is meant to hold government accountable, yes, but it's also a job that should pay, as it were. So the example, for example, the example of those in government who are pressmen, don't forget they also have to earn money. So essentially, their terms of reference is based on the perceive or the perception of the government in power, what the government wants. Okay, I don't want too much bad stories about me, or I don't want these things to get out. So is there a way to, because you've been in this for decades, so I know you can give some insight. Is there a way to balance that act? Because there's that role which should not be tainted by either economic or whatever, you know, issues. But there's also the money angle. So you don't want to lose a job, but you also want to hold government accountable. So how do you balance it?
Well, it is something that I think it's a tough thing, really. But the way to do it is also to get stakeholders, you know, to interact, to have lots and lots of discussions at various levels. People who do media work, you know, for government, with their principles, various levels.
And even the ones in private too.
Yes, and even the ones in private, I agree. People who work at that level with their principles in the media, different levels, you know, of engagement that I think, so that people will understand. It will be difficult because I know, for example, every politician, every office holder, political office holder, wants to have positive image all the time. So you don't want. But you see, you want to have positive image all the time, and there are gaps. You know, your performance, there are things you're supposed to do to deliver. Maybe you already made promises when you were campaigning. And then the media begin to say, you said so, so, and so at that time. But here we are, 1 month or 1 year later. You were supposed to have done this after 6 months, but your government hasn't done this, and they don't want to hear that one. So it's a difficult situation, but I imagine that the way to go would just to continue to have dialogue at different levels among stakeholders.
Okay. Well, there is a lot that's also happened in the media since the Third Republic. What we had back then was more of analog than digital broadcasting. And now, digital is not just one of those things, it's a major thing, such that everyone who is anyone is there. So, and that's around the conversations of World Press Freedom Day this year. We'll look at that and a number of other issues around that when we return from this break. Please stay with us. The theme of this year's World Press Freedom Day is journalism under digital siege. And yesterday when we began this conversation, we were asking questions around whether or not or how the media practitioners of the days of yore have been able to transit. So Dr. Akimbulu, let me begin that part with you. Well, the conversation is around journalism under digital siege, and it's a global phenomenon, but even more in our part of the world. There are so many issues around that. There are those who are pointing at, in fact, I think it was about 5 or 7 years ago, there was a conversation around who breaks the news, social media or traditional media. So who follows the news now? Who is playing catch up? And it would seem like today, the social media is doing a lot of things that the regular media is self-censoring. So there is that challenge. The transition between journalism as we knew it before this Fourth Republic became as strong as it has become, and now, that transition has been quite something, quite significant in the practice. How significantly would you say the digital journalism has impacted journalism in Nigeria?
Well, I think it has helped to build capacity. Why did I say so? Journalists began to find out that now, under this new dispensation, they had to engage, say, a global audience. In those days, you were writing for the typical maybe newspaper or for the radio or TV, and then for a local audience restricted. Now, as we are, even on this program now, well, I imagine how far, the content, has gone. So that means we need, to sit down and be very, very careful. We are engaging a global audience far, far wider. Content is going further, and then we need, to be more careful. Secondly, there are more players. You say digital now, far more players. That is, in addition to the journalists, you have other players who are there. And many of those players are players who do not care much about standards. So the journalist has to make sure, we really need to be very, very careful. We've got to keep sanity, to make sure, that this whole environment, is not, to use the word, polluted. So it makes the journalist want to work harder. It makes the journalist want to acquire, new skills to be able to do very well. These are things, that I see. It makes media professionals, in general, want to see what is in it in terms of business. This is a bigger arena. So how much of resource, can we get here, to the traditional resources that we used to get?
Very interesting angle, and it formed part of the index, the ratings that Reporters Without Borders did for the 2022 Press Freedom Index. Nigeria, yesterday we were still talking about how Nigeria ranks, 120 in 2021, but now we've even dropped further to 129. So from 115 in 2020 to 120 now, 129. And I'd like to take this to our Abuja guest, and looking at that particular ranking, you see China, for example, world's largest economy, or at least second largest, depending on how you look at it, ranking 175, even the US 42. And I'd like to get your thoughts about that, because some will ask, would you rather choose the economy of China over the press freedom of China? Because apparently a lot of people think you have to maybe stifle press, or at least stifle bad reporting of government to have a prosperous economy. It's a bit warped, but I wonder what you think about that.
For us in Nigeria, it's a two-edged sword. Because one, we have to ask ourselves, are we in a democracy or are we in an autocratic setting? If the spirit of democracy is what we are espousing, then we have to live up to that responsibility. And that's why the NBC, for example, has a critical role to play. that we're dropping on the index is kind of sad, and it highlights the fact that constant harassment of journalists, invasion of their privacy. We've seen high-end murder cases. We've seen false allegations thrown at them. A situation where we don't even understand that the journalist is not an essential service. We even need to correct that impression. We're beyond essential services. You have the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and then the media, the fourth estate. So we're not just an ordinary essential service. We are recognized by the Nigerian constitution, unlike in Chile, for example, where countries like that don't have that kind of conversation. Do you know what I mean? So in Nigeria here, I think the conversation we should be having is, how do we now begin to get the citizens to also be on our side, so that they too, with their voices, with the way digital journalism has gone, you have the citizen journalism become a mainstay, whether we like it or not, even though we have to do our job of standardizing it, using ethics, and then verifying some of the things we see online. They actually do help to drive this conversation. So what we should be looking at is, how do we get the citizens to be more on our side, to understand that our role is that important? And how do journalists themselves too fight for one another? We've seen situations where journalists could be in front of somebody of importance, a politician, say for example, and the politician insults the journalists, or call them names, or maltreat them, or even ask their aides to manhandle them. You see another journalist having the audacity to tell the fellow journalist to not talk. Now, it goes back to the fact that when you have persons in that space, it goes beyond just having paper qualification. We've seen many people with paper qualifications who do not do the job as required. In other words, what we need now is an instilling in the Nigerian journalists the respect and the prestige that goes with that job to also do it more effectively. We want a situation where even our legislature, the quality of the representation we have in our legislature is a reflection of the quality of the kind of electoral process we also run. And the citizens are also involved in this. And we are also very important in this process. So if we have more quality representation at the National Assembly, from what happened in the ECOWAS case, where they had to make a case and say, look, no, the Nigerian position on that Prohibition Act, right, the Cybercrime Prohibition and Protection Act 2015, which regards to Section 24, is outlawed. So if we say we're a democratic country, then it behoves on the executive, the judiciary, the legislature to live up to that. And they may also need more training and retraining. Same way journalists also need these kinds of reminders to make us understand that, look, we've got a job to do here. It's a job we have been given by the Constitution to do. So there should be no question about that. And I like what our guest in the Lagos studio was saying. Public officers are elected by the Nigerian citizens, journalists included. Now, if you go into public service and you're not ready for the criticism that we go with that job, please don't come to that space. You have no business being in that space. We need them to have that reorientation as we gear up to 2023. We want a situation where anybody coming into elected office would understand that, look, there's a job to do. There will be gaps. And that's why their media aides play a very crucial role. And most importantly, getting media aides who understand that, look, when I'm wearing my journalism hat, I'm wearing the journalism hat. When I'm wearing a PR hat for the politician or in politics, I am wearing that hat. There should be that consciousness to begin to delineate these differences. In other words, when you are serving as media aides to these politicians, there are moments where you will have critical discussions with your principal. You need to be able to bring your principal up to speed. And there are ways to do that in how you speak, in the memos you sent, in how you engage them in the conversation. When you make them understand that these are the issues, then they do better. And then they will understand that the criticism is actually to make them better in their public service. So being an elected official does not make you draconian. It does not give you the right to abuse journalists and talk down on them, harass them, invade their privacy, carry out all kind of horrible acts against them. It's against the law, by the way. And so we need a more effective Nigerian government who will make sure that when journalists are maltreated, there is expeditious judgment If it means even arresting police officers who harass them, please use that as an example. If it means dealing with them properly, using the law as far as it can go, please do that effectively. Journalists have an important role to play. Without them, the things they do as the executive or in government will not be known to the public, who are the citizens. So if they want us to do our job, they are better do their job as well.
Well, interesting when you talked about the role of media aids, and I remember at some point along the line of this work, one had to think as to what exactly is the career path for a journalist. It was saying that the pinnacle was becoming a media aid to an elected official, and it was saying that there was that question of is that how it's supposed to progress? Unlike what we see outside of the country, let's talk about even broadcast journalism more specifically. What you see outside of the country, where people in their 60s, people are doing this broadcast work even up till, until they decide that they want to retire. Maybe they've gone 40, 50 years in broadcast. But very rarely do you see people who are grey or, getting grey still on TV in Nigeria. The chances that they'll say, oh, what is he or she still doing there? By now you should have given way to younger people. That question, continues to, it bugged my mind for quite a while until I achieved some clarity on just what the trajectory of a journalist should be. But I do not know how clear it is for those who are coming behind as to what exactly the career path for a journalist ought to be.
Many young persons in the media, whether they come through as mass communication students or like some others who just are good at that job, that's like a gift for them. They navigate their space into that and gain the experience on the job. What they are not taught consciously is that there are many career paths. I've had opportunity to interact with young students. I train, I teach and stuff like that from time to time. And one of the things I discovered is many of them just think, I just want to be a newscaster. It ends there. It just ends there. That's where it ends. So it means that there's a lot of work we need to do in the training, in the curriculum, the design of it should be that you want to expand their imagination to know that they have so much options they can tap into. The trajectory, understandably, in Nigeria is what it is. Like I said, our income has been a weaponized tool in the hands of government. And that's why we need more persons with experience to be on the job. Ownership in Nigerian media is critical here. A situation where you don't have professionals who are owners of the media, you're going to constantly have these bottlenecks and these challenges mitigating against our advancement. But another thing is, even while in that space, as media organizations, if you notice how we even churn out content, the programs we give out, you know that there's a limitedness. Check out many of the media organizations nowadays. They just want to be a music station. That doesn't only just border on laziness, it borders on outright unwillingness to live up to the job of what a true media should be. And when you now have members, supposedly experienced journalists in that space, handling the positions as GMs and all of that, or head of programs of content and stuff like that, and you don't see them try to tweak it a bit and do much more than that, you limit the options even for the younger ones coming. They now feel, okay, the next top level for me is to take this next job in government. So we are the ones in a way that need to consciously now change that trajectory for them.
Well, Ejiro Okoro, you have said it in a way that, I don't think many could have said it. Thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Today this morning. She is a broadcast journalist, and it's very obvious and clear in terms of how she's spoken, and also a policy advocate. Thank you once again for coming on Sunrise Today this morning. I throw this over now to my colleagues in Lagos, gentlemen.
Well, thank you, Dr. Akimbolu. That conversation we're having right now, I'd like us to wind down on it. And it talks about, training those coming behind. I mean, that's the expression that is used. And I've had this challenge, suggesting to maybe institutions that, how about you have practitioners, those who have spent time practicing, also be a part of the teaching process? Because they'll tell you, okay, you need to go through your master's first, get your PhD. And for those people who are practitioners, they probably don't have time to go through all that, but they have the experience up to date. So is that something that you think might help actually to build those coming up so that they can have the right perspective, their horizons are widened to approach this job?
Sure, I agree with you. It's a good pathway to go. And I know that it happens in other climes, other countries, to be able to strengthen capacity building. I agree with you. It's a pathway to go. I also know, that these kinds of arrangements, are taking shape. And I want to implore our colleagues on both sides use this, to key into these kinds of initiatives so that, we can have better capacity building arrangements within the country. I agree with you. You're right.
I could go on and on with you because, you began by throwing bombs with all of the legislations. I just hope that, there are things that would really be able to take on succinctly. Dr. Akin Akimbolu, Executive Director, Institute for Media and Society, thank you so much for being a part of our conversation this morning.
It's my pleasure. Oh, thank you.
Well, one of the things that the media does is hold government to account, upholding accountability to the people. And that's what we're talking about when next you see us after this break.
Well, this job of holding government accountable is not just for the press alone. Yes, we have a huge role to play in that one, and we'll continue to do it. But don't forget, we have three arms of government, essentially for the purpose of, balance and check. There's the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. We have talked so much about a tool for accountability and transparency, which is audit, the Auditor General's reports. It's almost Aya's nickname now at this stage because he always refers to it and some of the revelations that come out of it. But it's not just a document for a document's sake. It's essentially meant to go to the Public Accounts Committee of, is it the National Assembly or the State Assembly? They're meant to go through it, take a look at the notes of the Auditor General, the infractions and all of that, and pass recommendations either by way of investigating the agency in charge, taking punitive measures, or even, going to the maybe EFCC, ICPC, as the case may be. So there's a lot of work for the legislature in holding government accountable. And this morning, we're expanding that conversation, which we started a few days ago about, accountability and transparency in governance. But we're taking this to the realm of the legislature. Just how much work has been done in that area. And to have this conversation with us is Honorable Abdullahi Abdulkadir, who is the Deputy Chairman, Public Accounts Committee, House of Representatives, is a representative of Ningi Waji Federal Constituency of APC in Bauchi State. Thank you for joining us on the program, Honorable. I'd like to get right into it. The Auditor General's report is something I imagine you know very well now, having had to go through it time and again. But the big question is, I know the Auditor General has made revelations, at least in that report, shocking revelations, people thinking, this is actually going on, but I'd like to know how much work you've been able to do with that Auditor General's report in ensuring that those found culpable, or at least those indicted, ministries, departments, or agencies, are brought to book.
Thank you very much.
It's your call. I understand he's back with us now, so you may want to ask him those questions, Malboy.
Indeed, Ayo, we seem to have been seeing a decline in respect for institutions, and I think that Honorable already spoke to the fact that some MDAs do not cooperate when they're trying to do their work as members of the Public Accounts Committee. Ordinarily, one would think that when you hear the name Public Accounts, that the Public Accounts Committee would like to see any MDA in connection with the Auditors General's or Auditor General's report, that MDA or whoever it is responsible in that MDA should be clamoring to quickly come and clear their name. But what you seem to be reporting is the fact that they seem to they seem to shy away or they refuse to cooperate. What usually happens? I know you've already taken us through the process, but for those MDAs that refuse to cooperate, is it that they do not have substantive heads? Is it that they feel that they're more powerful than the entirety of the National Assembly? Or is it that they think that they do not answer to the Public Accounts Committee? What exactly has informed their attitude from what you know?
From what I know, in fact, the issue of non-cooperation it starts from the work of the Auditor General, because we have instances where the Auditor General for the Federation reported some agencies that did not take the issue of the work of the Auditor General with the seriousness that it deserves. And in fact, even beside that, some of, in some cases, they are even faced with some hazards in the work, because there was a time we had a retreat. They reported to us that they went to a security formation, I think somewhere in Kaduna, to go and check the books of that organization. And they ended up being detained. They ended up being detained, and they were made to face the sun, things like that. So these are part of the hazard that even the Office of the Auditor General for the Federation are going through. And like I said, each time the Auditor General teams visit an MDA, after doing their work, there is what is called the exit meeting. And this exit meeting, most of the issues observed by the team of the Auditor General are supposed to be tracked, But sometimes just the exit meeting, it becomes a problem for the MDAs. So, and the Auditor General will be left with no option other than to include it in the report and then lay it before the Parliament. So you see, that is where the issue of non-cooperation starts. So when they come, we'll now give them, it is their right to be given, the charges made against them by the Auditor General for the Federation. And you realize that a lot of them will come with explanations that are admissible. So but you wonder why, in the first instance, why they refused to cooperate with the Auditor General for the Federation, why they had to, take and allow the process to linger on for long, why they had to, make public funds to be used. Because each time we summon them, they have to use the resources, public resources, to make copies of responses, to take time out of their busy schedules and things like that. So that is where the issue of non-cooperation even starts, before they come into the Parliament. And at the parliamentary level, we also...
sorry to interrupt you, Honorable. I'm really struggling to wrap my head around what you've just said, that the Auditor General or people from the Auditor General's office, in the course of doing their work, their legitimate duty, that they went to a security agency and they were detained and asked to face the sun like secondary school children. That is the height of disrespect to the job and the function of the Auditor General, and even to the people, to the dignity of the people who went to carry out the legitimate work. And it would seem that it continues to speak to the impunity which people continue to say that we seem to be experiencing a lot of. And it looks like we're just helpless in handling, handling the magnitude of the impunity which we see everywhere. I know that the House in recent times, not just the House now, even the Senate in recent times, has also struggled with invitations. That invitations are sent out to members of the executive, ministries, departments, agencies under the executive, and in many instances, the people who come are not the people who are requested to come. So, how have you been able to handle that? First, to continue to highlight this issue, looking for punishment, because there ought to be consequences. If there are no consequences, the next agency will hear that such a thing happened to members of the Auditor General's office and nothing happened. So the next time it could happen again. So what exactly would you be advocating in terms of consequences and, you know, bringing the full weight of either the National Assembly or the law to bear on situations and circumstances like that?
Thank you very much. Part of the things that we are doing to ensure compliance, one, we take up issues. Sometimes we report these MDAs to the leadership of the House, and the leadership intervenes. We have. Secondly, we resort to reporting these MDAs in most cases to the Secretary, to the government of the Federation. Thirdly, we also resort to publication, because if we give you a chance once, twice, thrice, and you fail to show up, we publish names of erring MDAs, and by the time we start taking them to the press, you see that they try to, you know, respond. But like you observe, this is not enough. I agree with you. There should be stiffer consequences, and that is exactly what we are trying to do with the audit jail. You asked me my opinion, what we should do to this MDS. For me, if any agency deliberately refused to appear for any committee, not just even the public account, but the public account is even a constitutional committee. It's mentioned in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So for any committee, for any MDA that refused to appear before us, I believe in the law, we should put issues like, you know, maybe cutting some part of their budget, asking the head of that organization to go on a suspension for like 3 months or 6 months. That way, because, you know, I don't know why sometimes if you try to be civil in operations, if you try to be civil in behavior, you are being taken for granted. Let me give you an instance. If now some punitive-oriented organizations like the EFCC invite any governmental official, you know, you will see that within no time they respond to their invitation. Why? Because they are afraid of being, you know, the way they approach, the way they handle people. No, people don't want to get that kind of treatment to them. Have you ever heard of invitations being turned down, EFCC invitations being turned down? It's very rare. It's very, very rare. But because we are doing things in a civil way, I think people are taking that for granted. So that is why we will be left with no option than to put these provisions in the law that will make any agency or any head of agency that refused to appear before the auditor or the Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly, there must be, or there should be, something very strong, you know, in order to deter other MDAs from taking the same path. So I agree with you. We need to be strict. We need to be stringent. We need to have clear out consequences on people who refuse to appear, on MDAs and their chief executives who refuse to appear. And another area of concern, like you observe,
Honorable, just a moment. I know that you'd like to tell us of another area. Just quickly, I would like to know when you report to the Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, what the response has been. And then in general, in terms of carrying out your work as Deputy Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee in the House, how much would you say that your committee has been able to either save or unearth in terms of accountability, you know, let's say further entrenched in the system from in the line of doing your work?
Well, okay, quickly before I answer this question, what I was trying to say, sometimes you invite MDS to appear. The people you need to see, you need to talk to are the accounting officers. So, but they resort to a kind of like trying to frustrate the hearing. They will tell someone that is not at even the senior management level of an organization. So in most cases, we turn them back. We refuse to take them until the appropriate person is before us, and or until there is a kind of the MDA takes for permission to send certain category of people. Maybe the particular aspect we are trying to deal with that day needs some kind of experts, and maybe the experts are not at the highest management level of the organization. Sometimes we give these concessions. Well, ordinarily, we used to turn them back and ask them, because the Procurement Act is very clear, Section 20, that it's immaterial whether somebody exercises the power on your behalf. The person that the accounting officer is liable will be held responsible, in terms of procurement issues. So this is very clear, and we make MDS to realize this. And I think with our insistence, the MDS have realized that yes, we mean business, and they have the compliance level is improving. And in terms of our report, our reports to the SDF, it is also yielding some results, though not as we wish, but at least it's better. Whenever we send 1, 2, 3, you realize that you have some certain number of them coming as a result of making referral to the office of the Secretary General or Secretary Federation. And back to a question on. Can you come up with the question again? You talked about. Just ask me a question. And
what the consequences are when you report to the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, one, and then secondly, if you have been able to save any money, uncover monies in the line of doing your work as Deputy Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee.
Yes. Yeah. As a committee, work as a committee under the indefatigable leadership of our chairman, Busayo Oluoleoke, and under his leadership, the committee has done a lot of things for the greater good of this country. We have been so innovative in terms of the work that we are doing as a committee. For instance, now as we speak now, before this summer break, and in the last maybe couple of months, we have been looking at the issues of tax evasion.
Okay, we'll try to get Honorable's response to that question and perhaps another. Okay, Honorable, go ahead now. We have you back.
Yes, from the time we started that, a lot of companies we discovered that are, cleverly evading taxes in this country. We have made them to come to the realization that that period is over. We have been working with the Federal Inland Revenue Service to X-ray and examine some companies that have been claiming some kind of fiscal policies of the country to evade tax. For example, if a company comes in, there's what they call pioneer status, and that pioneer status is supposed to give you a kind of freedom to operate, without the burden and responsibility of tax for a certain period of time, 5 years. So, in the course of our investigation, we discovered that some companies, after that 5 years, instead of them now come on the tax net, they will go and register another company in the name of the same business. They'll go and register a new name and go and claim this pioneer status again. And you see, that way the economy is losing. It's a kind of we are losing money through that, and we have made some companies. I don't want to mention company names here because, but there is a company that paid the Federal Inland Revenue Service over 24 billion in the course of this exercise we are doing. And there is also another company that is responsible for, management, a kind of sort of management or managing some free zones in the country that we trace about 17 billion, which we realize it is in the central bank. You know, there are a lot of these issues that
so
we
maybe
have
putting
also
those two together, pardon me, maybe about at least 40 billion you've been able to...
We have also realized, no, it's quite higher than this, because I didn't just have time to put these things together. Maybe we'll find time and do a press briefing and give you details of work of...
Because it will be important for Nigerians to know just how much work you're doing.
Nigerians will know in the appropriate time.
Okay, Honorable, we have to wind down now, but you can quickly make that point so I can put in another question. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I was trying to bring the issue of what do you call it, tax. Honestly, this is a serious issue in this country. For me, I think we should stop waiver. We should come up with a more transparent, with a more patriotic waiver policy in this country, because it will annoy you to know that sometimes companies come and claim waiver on things that we should ordinarily be doing in this country. We have seen a company that got an import waiver of over 5 billion naira on things that we have them in this country. Why? Why should we be doing this? You know, we have no other country than Nigeria.
Okay,
So
Honorable, as we wind down now.
At the end of the day, like I said, at the end of the day, some of the takeaways we're having, yes.
Okay, pardon me, just to wind down on this, I'd like you to speak to a specific issue that was raised, and that was the report of missing arms in the police, over 178,000 arms and ammunition. And I recall the House of Reps, I think it was in January, saying that it will be investigated. So what is the state of that investigation?
Well, the decision of the House is, even though it was raised by the Auditor General for the Federation, and if you recall, our chairman urged the House to give us a further mandate to go ahead with that investigation, but our request was not given. An ad hoc committee was set up to deal with that issue. And I can't speak for the ad hoc committee because I'm not a member of that committee, and the job of going through that has been taken. It has been assigned to that committee, so to speak. So I don't really have much to say about that.
Well, this is a point we have to anchor. Honorable Abdullahi Abdulkadir, the Deputy Chairman, Public Accounts Committee, House of Representatives. It's been quite instructive speaking with you on the program this morning. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's take a look at the comments, messages that you have sent in this morning. Quite interesting ones, I must add. But let me start with the one by Brendan Ohizu on the Auditor General of the Federation report, saying, the disclosure by the honorable member on your show of how auditors who visited some security agencies were maltreated by these security agencies demonstrates that there seems to be no political will to tackle corruption.
Speaking in the same vein, Professor Enakena says, all arms of government must ensure that there's cooperation, coordination, and transparency in enacting policies and programs that will help in rebuilding and remolding the citizenry for the foundation of building a new Nigeria where politicians' transparency is fundamental.
And Pastor Law Alpha Cross says, with the advent of social media, conventional media has been hard hit and the profession highly bastardized, making it extremely difficult to regulate or sanitize the space, forcing government to adopt draconian measures. Does it really justify that? Big question.
Really big one there. And Olagunjo Oladele's tweet is also in line, saying absolute press freedom is a luxury most journalists in the world simply do not have. Moreover, press freedom is freedom within the law. Government and press in a just society are two sides of the same coin. Both are intended to serve within the law of a nation, he says.
And Festus Akimboyewa says, while government at all levels are still not allowing freedom of expression to flourish in our country and are still making it difficult for journalists to access information, journalists should be more afraid of our unregulated online space that's encouraging fake news. Well, I know that if you were to have this discussion over the next 1 week, there'll be so many angles to approach it from. But we thank you all for participating in the discussion this morning. Thank you for watching. The first work day of this week. I do not know if people will be going to work in Abuja, given the rains that fell this morning. But who knows? Thank you so much for watching. I'm Maokwe Yusuf.
For some of us, it's the third work day in the week, but we're not complaining, right? We're more than essential services. It's been a great pleasure having you on the program. I'm Kayode Okikele.
Have a wonderful day and keep fit. I'm Ayo Makinde.